All right, so it is noon and we may have some more people coming in, but we want to respect everyone's time. And so we'll start with just a little bit of housekeeping. Welcome, first of all, to ASC Live. Um, Let me reiterate that you can absolutely participate in the chat. You can introduce yourself, um, let people know where you're from. Hello, Marcia. And then also we have a Q&A feature. So if you have questions for Sara as we go through, feel free to put them in the Q&A and our moderator will make sure that we see those. And of course, like I said, you can use the chat to chat. We do have the auto captions in Zoom on. All you have to do is select the Show Captions CC button from your toolbar, and those will appear to you. We are also recording, just so you know, and the recording of this will be up about in a week with edited captions to replace those auto captions that we're using today. And without further ado, I cannot wait to get started and introduce you all to Sara Stevick. This is Accessibility Through Many Lenses, Lessons Learned in Designing for Accessibility. Sara is a freelance consultant focused on user-centric product and business transformation. And today we're going to be talking about how her journey through many fields and work experiences has shaped her approach to designing for accessibility. And without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Sara herself and let her kind of tell us a little bit about who she is, where she hails from, how she got into accessibility.
Sure. Well, thank you, Crystal. Hi, everyone. I'm Sara Stevick. I am currently living in Summerville, South Carolina, and my journey is very eclectic, I guess is the best way to kind of describe it. I started off in deaf education. I have taught many different subjects at the School for the Deaf in Virginia. And then I moved to Arizona, whereas I'm an itinerant teacher for the deaf. So really focused in on supporting educational professionals in proper practices for making sure that IEP accommodations for individuals with hearing loss were met. And then I went into general education, where my special education background really served me well for all of my students there, which was really my first exposure to understanding that when you design for anyone that has more significant support needs, you are significantly supporting everyone. So from there, I went into instructional design. Started off at a major financial institution as a senior instructional designer in 2020, and then moved into learning technology manager role with a e-commerce retail company. And then I was a learning strategist for a pharmaceutical consulting company. And so through all of those lenses, I've worked on many different initiatives across different products and product teams, thinking about user experience, thinking about design for adoption, designing for use, and all of the challenges that come with that. And some of the things that we might encounter when we're trying to learn a new technology or a new process, or even integrating into a business culture or a new way of thinking and adopting workflows, and what that means throughout your career as different strategic priorities for the business shifts.
Thank you, Sara. So I guess my first question is, obviously you've experienced designing for accessibility and those kind of principles behind it in your work experience. But are there any like personal connections to accessibility and those kind of principles that you have?
Absolutely. So I am actually neurodivergent myself. I have ADHD. I'm also someone that struggles with, at times, anxiety, especially surrounding social situations. Um, and so accessibility to me means so much more than let's put on some captions and make sure that we have a picture transcription at the bottom description for those who have visual support needs. It's embracing people's need to go faster or go slower, or their need for maybe support from a manager, or their need for space. And, everybody's cup is only so full at any given time. And so whether or not you're neurodivergent in that, you know, that cup empties and refills through different activities. And being aware of that for myself and the struggles that I've gone through has really helped me to develop empathy for others going through it. And having seen my former students go through some of these struggles, as well as my own son, who is on the autism spectrum. And so accessibility is very near and dear to my heart because it's really about creating that, equity, right? We need to have resources that are available to everyone if everyone is expected to do work.
I love what you said about your cup, people's cups filling in different ways in different spaces at different times. And I think you and I have spoken about how, as like designers or instructors, um trying to be aware of that even when maybe things aren't disclosed to us is a challenge. And I mean, can you speak to that at all? Any like situations where you've experienced that, or ways that you kind of try to look for that if you're not like directly said, here, the student has an IEP, or yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. We never know what is going on in someone's life, right? We can assume, which we all know what they say about assuming. You shouldn't do it, right? That's what they say. And so that's all they say about that. And so with that, it's giving the space needed for people to articulate in a way that's comfortable for them, or leaving the space open and planning ahead for those things. So for instance, when we first all went remote during the pandemic and there was this huge push, everybody needs to be on camera. And being on camera can be emotionally, physically draining for some individuals, especially if you're looking at yourself. This can cause a lot of stress, anxiety. So letting people know that they have that flexibility. Hey, everyone, welcome to the session today. If you would like to be on camera, we would love to see your face. If you need to be off camera for whatever reason, we completely appreciate that as well, and we'll support you through that. If there's anything we can do today to make your experience more accessible, such as providing a transcript or closed captions after the session, or if you need notes, we have a PowerPoint that we send out at the end that has everything available to you, or even better, send out the PowerPoint ahead of time. We don't need to gatekeep the information. It's very much so along the lines of, well, you have to complete this section before you do this section, before you do this section. We're all adults here. So when we put trust into people and let them know that it's okay to come forward with what they need, and we provide that supporting and responsive environment, then they're going to respond to that with enthusiasm, with engagement, because they're going to feel respected and seen for their needs. We can't do anything if Maslow's needs aren't met first. And so, just creating space is the most important.
So, I mean, obviously you don't have when you're talking about that, the first thing that pops into my head from a higher education faculty perspective is making sure that you have accessible and inviting and inclusive language on your syllabus. And I know that's something that I've seen lots of sessions on lately, so I'm so glad. But what does that look like in a world where you don't have a syllabus? Like, It's so
Yeah.
easy for us to think of strictly the higher ed piece, but our students in K through 12 higher ed, they're going to eventually go into jobs. And so I love that you're talking about industry, but what does that look like when you don't have a syllabus to make that introduction? Like, where do you put verbiage like
Sure.
that?
Oh, I love that question. So while we may not have a syllabus per se, some companies do. In industry, typically there are HR functions, engagement functions, and that support individuals with needs in these arenas. So they'll ask, do you need accommodations? Do you need this? Do you need that? And so definitely take advantage of those resources. Oftentimes they'll have communities that you can join in the industry. So, for instance, we at a couple of my former workplaces, they actually had, those who struggle with ADHD, they had a support group for that on Slack. So there's ways that way, but when we're talking about designing for instruction, designing for product, when we are talking about going into a board meeting or meeting with your team or with executives or even just one-on-one with other people, really anywhere that you can have written language and communication, that's how you can get ahead of it. Send an agenda with your meetings so that people know how to mentally prepare. They can bring what they need, set out goals and put those into, by the end of this meeting, we're hoping to accomplish X, Y, and Z. So if that person needs a little bit more time to prepare, they can do so. Plus, it anchors everyone. The only thing that adding more in that context does is set everybody up for success because it's there for you. For learning, especially, put it so as an instructional designer, you do create project plans, you create outlines, you have your content storyboards, and then you have your mock-ups and your prototypes. And so throughout that, it's including that language in, like, let's say you log into LinkedIn and you want to take a course on LinkedIn in that language, right? It should call out these things. Captions are available here. Um, you know, if you would like this, the materials available at a different reading level, we have them accessible here, here, and here. So it's anticipating the needs based on your audience. And the best way to do that is to do need analysis, is to understand your target audience and who's going to be in the room, and then adjust accordingly. If you're doing blanket accommodation solutions for all of your activities, yes, likely you're going to help some, but in order to help all, there's the blanket ones, and then there's ones that you need to be able to pivot with through each interaction. So that's knowing who you're talking to and getting to know them.
That's I love that because so frequently I feel accessibility, um we want to make it something more broad and less specific than accommodation, eh, to the point that we are helping more than just an individual person, we're helping a population. But I think there is that middle ground that you're talking about where it's not as specific as an accommodation for one individual, but it's also not so broad that it's not helping, in anyone. And besides, I guess, and I don't know if there's a yes answer to this question or not, but like besides just getting to know, the people in your immediate population, like what are some other ways that you can, that you can suss that out or come towards that middle ground?
Absolutely. So ask for feedback. We only know what we're opening ourselves up to knowing. So when you create something like a product or like a learning or an agenda, ask for feedback prior to going in. You can run A/B groups, so you can test out the product, and in that you can make focus groups and say, were your needs met through this? Was there anything that you felt was a little bit extra? And then trust, but verify. this is the most important part. You're going to get feedback from everywhere. And if you try and solve for each piece of feedback, you'll end up not being able to solve for any of the feedback. So in that instance, you find the top trends, right, in that data. So if your target audience, and you're going to do this with your target audience, right? Hey, we had that meeting on Friday, as your manager on my design team, I want to know and make sure that everybody got what they needed. Feel free to reach out to me, privately in a separate email or however you feel comfortable. But I also have this anonymous way to submit feedback if you would like, so that I can make sure as your manager, I'm meeting your needs so that we can achieve together. That's the goal. You're there to achieve together, and you can't achieve together if you're not getting that feedback from who you're together with.
And that is a perfect moment to pause for our very first question. Do you have examples of the blanket accommodations we were just talking about and pitfalls to be aware of?
Sure, that's a great question. So blanket accommodations might mean if you have open captions, some might find that distracting. So potentially you could have captions that are optional and allowing that to be in the room, right? Anywhere that you can make it as flexible as an option as possible with a relatively low lift is ideal, because the last thing that you want is that we're over accommodating to the point of distraction for any audience. So for me, if I see captions on a screen, I have to look at them. I will not look at the people talking. I will not look. Does that matter in every instance? No, but it might matter if there's something that I need to be attending to on the screen. And that kind of brings up a misconception that's kind of near and dear to my heart about deaf and closed captions, is that just because there's words on the screen doesn't mean that it's accessible to them. So understanding what truly makes something accessible to your target audience is important. And figuring out ways to get them what they need, because if they're looking down at closed captionings, they're missing the animations on your screen, So again, the worst thing we can do is assume. The best thing we can do is ask.
This is so pertinent. Just this week, working with some faculty in our culinary program, we have a student who is learning English and is struggling a little bit with some translation. And I'm, was trying to think out of the box, find some sort of a solution just so she wouldn't get behind in her classes. She can read and write pretty well. And but it's the fluency when the instructor is talking that was becoming a problem. And at one of the conferences, I had seen the use of PowerPoint Present Live. And it has a translation feature, and they can scan the QR code, and that could be really handy for several different reasons. But I had one of the instructors who was like, "What does that do? Can you put those up on the screen too?" And I was like, "Yes, but if I put them up on the screen, people can't choose whether or not to interact with them." So exactly what you were saying, it's like having open rather than closed captions in a video where it's not optional. And then the people who get very distracted by squirrels, like myself, are could be so distracted by the closed captions that and they were like, "Oh, I hadn't thought about it that way." And I think that's such a good example. Are there any I'm trying myself to think of any other of kind of those like blanket pitfalls to watch out for specifically.
Well, before we do that, I'd love to talk a little bit about what you brought up with having a student or a learner who is trying to access whatever you're teaching in a language other than what is being presented in. I had a student, this was when I was in a general ed teaching position, and she spoke no English. She was a refugee. And I had, at that point, I had my, what we call in industry slide decks in education, they're PowerPoints, and they will forever be PowerPoints. It doesn't matter if they are made in Google. I'm just saying. So, but technically we call them slide decks. So if you would like to do that, like B2B kind of thing. But I had my PowerPoints. I would stand up and do my preach and teach. We would do an activity together, I do, we do, you do, and everything was gravy. And it was exactly the pedagogical approach that everybody just learns about and implements all the time on the daily, right? Like, yeah, that's real life. And I realized I needed to adjust my approach overall. So what I ended up doing was I started to, before every class, I would give her all of the PowerPoints a week in advance, and they would be translated into her language. And she could ask questions, and I'd tell her which days we were doing stuff. So immediately ahead of we had that. And I started to implement a flipped classroom so that I could break the students into groups so that I could work one-on-one with the different groups and meet them where they needed. And again, this is a perfect instance where accommodating for one need accommodates for all. I was able to provide more appropriate direct instruction at the point of need and do groupings to support that. So I could partner her up with a peer that was patient, that was willing to draw things out, and work through the translator in the moment. And I was able to be more successful. And she felt empowered too, without being called out for her needs, because we were filling the needs of everyone.
I love that. And we actually have a hand raised.
Oh,
So,
excellent. Yay.
Chris, let me give you talking permission.
Hi, Chris. There does need to be off mute, though. That is.
Yes,
Sorry,
That's
I
okay.
inadvertently raised my hand and I didn't mean to. I'm so sorry.
that's okay. Well, hello, Chris.
Hello,
Thank
Chris.
you for raising your hand and testing out whether we can let panelists talk now that I know that we can. If you have something you'd like to say, you can raise your hand and we can let you talk. Digital accessibility. That's where I wanted to go next. Because we have talked about it, and I know you have in our conversations, we've shared some resources back and forth. Um, like, where would you say, like, somebody very novice, very beginning to accessibility, what would be like the first thing that you would tell them from like a design perspective to focus on learning or to go out and get support on? I'm not phrasing that well, sorry.
Oh, I love this question. If you're not familiar with WCAG, you need to be. First and foremost, these govern how we make things accessible from a web standpoint, which comes into every service and product, because getting anything done without the internet nowadays is like, it's not happening. So, a couple other things that I would strongly advise is thinking about invisible disabilities along with the disabilities that first come to your mind. So yes, we might think about, okay, blind, it needs to be screen reader accessible. We might think deaf needs to have transcript or captions. Ask those populations if those things are actually useful. Are they using different tools to access content now? There's been so many advances. There's ways to put like, you're on mute, by the way, Crystal. You can feel free to interject.
Sorry, I was like, it's so much like that. Sorry.
That's okay. So for instance, they're doing automations, testing out live signing with audio that they can put signs up. So if that's something that would make it more accessible versus captions, see what you can do there. But then there's the invisible disabilities, like color blindness. A lot of people don't think about color blindness. or there's visual disabilities that are not necessarily blindness, but there's certain disabilities that actually, with certain color combinations, can cause seizures, can cause other medical adverse effects, strobing lights, right? All of these things, they're not necessarily your first go-to. So check your color schemes and your compatibility. There's lots of free online color contrast checkers to make sure that they are accessible in that way. And then also thinking about your experience going through it. Are you filling in the gaps because you made it? Where might gaps be that you might not anticipate? Think about it from the lens of people who are on the spectrum, people who are ADHD, people who are having a rough day, people who are struggling with the workload, work-life balance, parents. Like, when we talk about accessibility, it's about making it equitable and accessible for all people. That means everyone has needs, and they're not going to be necessarily the first needs that come to mind. So again, always do your audience analysis. They're who you're serving anyway. Why would you make something for someone that's not there, right? So, great question.
And I did just one of the many, the TPGI color contrast checker is wonderful to have at your fingertips. It's got the point and click, so you can just grab with the eyedropper. It makes it a little easier than trying to figure out the hex code, especially if you're not a graphic designer type person. But there were some other wonderful links that I'm going to drop in. We were talking about the Ally Project and their website, and what a great tool that is, especially I think for those, I mean, for all of us. They've got articles on ChatGPT, and it's used for cognitive accessibility for individuals with brain trauma, but they've got a lot of really basic stuff too. Is there anything in particular, like on that website, that you would direct people to, or a particular resource?
Yeah, taking a look at conducting an accessibility audit. So you've made something and you're like, you know what, best thing since sliced bread. I'm so excited about this. And then you get it out there, and turns out only about 50% of your target audience can actually access it, whether it's you didn't provide clear enough instructions to navigate through the course. Maybe you built a front-end web page that how do I get back to that page? Where can I find this? It's hidden so far down in a menu. So do an audit, right? Ideas are wonderful. Whenever we start a project, we want to do the yes and exercise, right? Yes, and it can have this, and it can have that, and it can have this, and this. Then you go back in with an editing eye and you're like, this might not work because of this, or this might be better here. Here's how we can accommodate. And it doesn't matter how seasoned I become as a product designer, as a learning experience designer, instructional designer. It doesn't matter. I will always, always, always get another 1 to 2, if not more, professional sets of eyes on my things, because there's going to be gaps that I might not have considered. So that quality assurance piece, it's not about, when it comes to designing accessible things, it's not about ego and who can do it the best. It's about how we can come together to do it right. So really lean into your network, lean into the people that you're hoping to serve. When in doubt, ask. We don't know what we don't know. So,
Well, and I think there's whether we like it or not, whether you're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, all of those different pieces of those frameworks, implicit bias comes into all of them. And even as a designer, as an instructor, implicit bias that I didn't used to have before I started working in the accessibility field was I just didn't even think about. I didn't know about screen reader friendly, designing alt text and whatnot. But then as I started to learn, I realized that I was gaining implicit bias because of the things that I knew about and felt comfortable with, and wasn't finding the gaps in the things that I, as you said, I didn't know, or didn't feel comfortable in trying to audit myself. And that having a network, which is why, events like this and conferences you can go to and websites and Slack channels, it can seem overwhelming because there is such a big community, but having those individuals to reach out to and say, hey, I'm not great with figuring out if this is good for individuals on the spectrum. Do you have any experience with that? Could you look this over? Such a
Yeah.
blessing to have that kind of community and to build that.
I love that you brought that up. So, something interesting. This is just one that, I Googled, but there are bias checkers that you can use. Just Google bias checkers for, learning experience or web pages or, even just content. Um, there's, in addition to bias checkers, thinking about culturally, it might not be accessible culturally, some turns of phrase. Can you use more global language that's inclusive? So avoiding idioms, avoiding uh, anything that is figurative language that might alienate, and also really think about how you're presenting information, right? In America right now, right? Fourth grade reading level is most of what we're dealing with. Now, that is right there on the median. There's so much on either side of that, right? So how much are you putting into text? Are you using jargon that makes your content unaccessible, right? Thinking about how you can bring that access, how you can make it in a way that fills the need. Yeah, sure, great. Drag and drops. Oh, do a sorting activity. It'll be so much fun. There's so much to interact with. It is interactive that way. And that's great for those who can access that. For those who cannot access that for whatever reason, we were just talking about before we started the webinar, in 2019, I had a tumor in my dominant hand, and there were months that I could not use my dominant hand, so I was using my left hand. I could not do a lot of, say, like the video games that I like to play, shh, don't tell, or, just even designing e-learning or going through e-learning was very challenging for me because of not having that capability of using my dominant hand. So, all of that's to say, just really thinking about how you can make it globally accessible in the population that you're serving and what might some of their needs be that you might not anticipate. So, again, when in doubt, ask it out.
Um, also, No Mouse Monday. If no one has heard about that, that is something you can challenge yourself with, even if it's not all Monday. But talking about, learning about things maybe we don't always think of or don't have experience with. I can't even remember where I saw it. It might have been on something linked with Global Accessibility Awareness Day. But yeah, if you can take 30 minutes or an hour out of your Monday and try to do what you do or what you're designing without using your mouse, just it builds that muscle of thinking about how do I design with mobility in mind.
Well, now I am going to play devil's advocate.
Okay.
Because I love to do fancy stuff. I do. I'm not gonna lie. I'm a sucker for a good drag and drop. Especially like I'll never forget I made a baby proofing uh e-learning for it was just a fun little pet project thing that I did. But you actually had to like there was a hand on the screen and you had to use your mouse to go like this to turn the little things for the baby gate to make it, totally inaccessible for My point in bringing that up is you can still do fun stuff like that. You just have to have an alternative that is as effective for anyone else. Having a transcript for a video is not the same level of access as watching the video. It's not. Because you're reading it separately, you're not getting the visuals. So the impact, people who are reading that transcript are having to work that much harder to try and find that place. And all of this comes into play when we're talking about something called cognitive load. So cognitive load is someone's ability to take in information, process it, and then apply it, right? Think about it like I always think of the screen meter from Monsters Inc., where it fills up and then it's full, right? Can only take so much in. And so when you have to use your brain to do things like matching up visuals with the information, that's taking up the space needed to actually access the content. So if you've planned that perfect amount of content that will fill up a neurotypical meter, anybody with any type of accessibility need that is beyond what you have designed for, they are not getting the content. They're not getting it all. So when you're designing, maybe design for content to be this much and leave this much as flexibility room for those different types of accommodations. This can look like instead of doing a 30-minute or hour-long e-learning, it's too long, my friends. It's too much. Nobody wants to sit through that. Always ask yourself, would you do it? And would you like it? And the answer is no. No, you would not. And that's okay. That's okay. We can admit it now. We can admit it now. So make sure whatever you're putting in there is absolutely necessary. They call it, I think, killing my darlings in poetry and writing, right? Just because you find it fascinating and just because the subject matter expert says, hey, what would be a really great idea? You can say, hey, that is a great idea. Let's put it in the cliff notes.
Nice.
Let's put it in the cliff notes.
Extra
Still included.
resources.
Extra resources. Think about the behavior you're targeting when you're designing something. What will be the impact of what you're designing? What will be the result? What will they be able to do because you have made this thing? And if it doesn't directly support that, it's extra. You don't need it. Doesn't matter how interesting. You just don't need it.
Yeah. So I do want to take a second and see if there are any questions for Sara. We do have a little bit of time left, and I have another topic that I want to talk about, but I thought we'd pause here and see if anyone has a question or comment they'd like to share, either in the chat or by raising your hand.
Or in
I
the Q&A feature, they also have
yes, I'm sorry, that's what I
anonymous.
meant.
Yeah.
In the Q&A.
Either way, wherever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, and those links again in the chat right now. We have the color contrast checker, the Ally project, and then that bias checker. Another one that is interesting is the Harvard implicit bias test. And I know a lot of DEI initiatives utilize that as kind of a first stop too. And by all means, if you still have a question about digital accessibility, you can ask it at any time. But I do want to explore a little bit the realm beyond digital accessibility, because so frequently we focus on that and we forget about what it looks like in a tangible classroom. And especially after this push to go online and after hybrid and high flex and flip and etc., there are still elements of in-person teaching and learning going on in the world. So any thoughts on that?
Yes. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Sometimes less is more. Okay. So when we're thinking about in-person, there's this big push in a whole bunch of industries. Either, there's three camps, right? You got remote first, let's do it. Yeah. And then you got, no, we're going back to the office. Everybody come back in, and then you got the middle people. That is arguably the most difficult one to accommodate for, is the middle ground, where you're having to do virtual and live, and somehow you're supposed to split your body and accommodate everything all at once. It's a magical unicorn thing. Unicorns do not exist, and they don't exist, and that's okay. So what to do when you're faced with these types of things, or somebody brings up, oh, let's do gamification, or oh, let's do AR, VR, or all of these different shiny tools. There's so much excitement around it. Allow yourself to feel the excitement. Allow the person who came up with the idea to feel their excitement, brainstorm it out, and then say, okay, now that we have this awesome idea, let's think through, is this the best way to solve the problem? True back to the problem. Whenever you're designing, it's so tempting to say, oh, we can throw this at it. We can do this thing. We can do this. That's solutioning before understanding what you're trying to solve for. So get all your ideas out. Then come back to, let's wipe the slate clean. These are options. We have them written down. We feel heard. We feel like they're somewhere so we don't forget them. So there's less anxiety. And let's come back to, what are we trying to do here? Is there another way that's faster, cheaper, more efficient, and is more impactful? Right? Doesn't work as an acronym. Whatever. But, I tried for you guys. The point is, come back to the question of the need. Yes, you could do AR, VR, but you could also just do, hey, everybody stand up. We're going to act it out real quick. Or if you're, taking phone calls in a call center, do you need AR, VR to experience that? Or could you sit down with a partner and say, pretend you're on a phone call? How fast would it take? AR, VR is really expensive, and it has its uses. For instance, we're talking about flight simulator, right? Or combat training, or, emergency responses. It allows that to create that immersive environment that you can have that stimulus coming in to interact with. But there's a lot of challenges with AR, VR, like vertigo.
Huge challenge, FYI.
Huge. And it's expensive. Maintenance on that type of material, shelf life. Do you have the right equipment? You're buying the equipment, and as soon as you buy it, there's a new AR, VR device that you'll need to use to keep it up and running, thousands and thousands of dollars. So think about it. Do we need that for a call center? No. Best advice I can give in that instance: technology is not a solution. It is a tool to facilitate a solution. All of the tools in your toolbox for designing, and even if it's online, if it's in person, they're just tools to facilitate a solution, and you are the ultimate facilitator. So think about that when you're designing, and coming back to, what are we trying to do? And can we do it in a different way? Brainstorm all the different ways out and then figure out the best path from there. And it might not even need half of the solution that you were really excited about.
And I love what you're saying about um, trying to solve the problem and facilitating solutions because and I want to clarify that, Sarah, you're using the term designer, and I know that sometimes instructors who maybe don't have that background don't think of themselves as designers, especially if they work in a community, an institution where they have instructional designers, and that's the designer's job. But what I want to say is that all faculty are designers, because they're, especially in the face-to-face portions of class, you don't have an instructional designer telling you how to present in your classroom. You might have somebody helping you curate materials and put them into an LMS, but you, the instructor, are the facilitator and the delivery designer, and that gives that same power. But even if you don't have a design background, thinking about the problem and thinking through solutions, you can't go wrong with that.
That's right. And I love that you brought up different industries. So, having been a teacher, I've had to create my own curricula. I've had to create all of the learning materials, what we might call learning assets, for my instruction, and I've had to do it really quickly. Those we would call rapid prototypes in like instructional design. And when we're thinking about that process, if I'm an instructional designer creating what we call instructor-led training, ILTs, or VILTs, virtual instructor-led trainings, I'm designing that in collaboration with the instructor. And there's so many reasons why I would do it that way. Mainly because you have to have a seat in the room as the instructor to feel ownership of that material, to feel empowered that it has your voice, that you can confidently be the facilitator for that information. You can take it from whatever you are given and get it to the audience in a way that they can respond to, that we can see impact, that we can see results from, right? So if you are a faculty member, a teacher, and you currently don't have a voice in your design process, ask about that. Say, would it be all right if I provided some feedback? I would love to collaborate with you on the next thing. Or, hey, this activity went really well. Are you open to some suggestions that I have that might make it go a little bit smoother the next time? Remember, it's not that what's there is awful on either side. We're augmenting the awesome, to quote one of my good friends, Dan Singer. He's an amazing person. Yeah.
I
So,
like that, augmenting the awesome.
yes.
Well, we
Yes,
are
he's very
coming
smart.
to the end of our time, but I also wanted to give one more chance for any questions or comments, either in the Q&A or if you want to raise your hand. I do want to call out in the chat, Mary Ortiz. I love that you were speaking about pushing your being pushed beyond the basic builds, and learning to be more creative and making activities that everyone can participate in equally. I think that was a little bit of foreshadowing to our conversation today. So way to be thinking ahead, Mary. I do want to actually, Jacob, do you have that link? Could you drop that in the chat? Sarah has a wonderful LinkedIn presence and is very happy for you to reach out to her, connect with her there. And we will get that link put in the chat for you.
And even
Sarah,
if it's something like you're working on a project and you just want a second set of eyes and say, again, coming back to that professional feedback, just having another set of eyes on it. Or if it's something like, I've been doing this activity for years, I'm not seeing the results that I want. You want to have a brainstorming session? Yes, I love to do that. I love to create, collaborate. We're limited by our own perspectives if we never collaborate. So, feel free to reach out. Also happy to talk about if you're looking to get into corporate or different sectors, my experience there, especially with having disabilities. I'm happy to talk with you about anything related to that, how I've approached design, how there are times when you're designing and you recommend an accessible solution and a client or someone will say, we don't have time for that. We don't have the funds for that. And what do you do in those times? How do you be an advocate? That can be challenging, and building that rapport and working up to it. Sometimes we have to lose a battle to win the war, and that's important and frustrating all at the same time. Progress like this is slow. So most important thing is building awareness, doing so in a way that doesn't dismiss what's existing, but again, augments the already awesome, even if it's not the most awesome in your perspective. That's okay.
Sara, I can't thank you enough for being here. Welcome, as you're talking about building, community. Welcome to the Accessibility Summer Camp community. So glad that you could come and share your wisdom. That link is in the chat. It's linkedin.com/in/Sara Stevick, all one word. And you can become her friend on LinkedIn and pick her brain. I know I fully intend to. I also have some other links that I'm going to put in the chat right now. This is for Accessibility Summer Camp. We still have a few days left, actually about a week left, to submit a proposal for presenting at the virtual conference on June 14th. And if you are eager to register, we encourage you to do so. It is free again this year. Ashton says, thanks for your motivational and insightful words. It's so
Most
true.
welcome.
We hope to see you at Accessibility Summer Camp, Sara, and to all of you out there, we hope to see you as well. We will have another ASC Live coming up, working on finding our presenter for next month. So stay tuned to the website. And thank you all for being here. There will be a new ASC Live page on the website next week that will have not only this presentation, but also the recording from the previous two for this year. So, Sara, again, thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a wonderful weekend. And
Thank
all
you.
for
Same to you, and thanks for having me.
You
Thanks
bet.
for coming.
Bye, everyone.